Hello, today's lecture is about Stephen Sondheim. We're heading into the home stretch here. We have this module, one more module, and our final exam, which is coming up. And just so that you know, I'll be putting an announcement out on the EC Learn group for our course that gives you a lot more details about the final. The final, together with the last lecture, will both become available to you on Friday, and you would be able to do the final on Friday or Saturday or Sunday, and I'll be putting the grades together at the beginning of next week. This particular lecture, though, as I said, is about Stephen Sondheim. Considered by many to be the preeminent composer of the American musical theater, Stephen Sondheim has won more Tony Awards than any other composer. His career stretches from contributions to landmark musicals we've already talked about, like Gypsy and West Side Story, over to modern masterpieces such as Company and Sweeney Todd. With this lecture, I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of biography of the man, and then we're probably going to go, in this particular case, show by show, because there's so much to be said, not so much as about the structure of the plot, the way we did with, say, Oklahoma. Here it's more about the way each show is put together. Sondheim is has a real penchant for challenging himself with just the format of a show and finding new ways to write a show and new ways to put a show together. Among the pieces that Sondheim is responsible for, you have a collection ranging from 1960 all the way to a couple of reviews that were put out in the 1990s and in this last decade. And he is still very much alive and very much active in the theater world today. His work spans a little bit before the 60s in that he's also contributed, as I said, lyrics, particularly shows like Bernstein's West Side Story. Stephen Sondheim was born in 1930 in New York, and he, for the most part, grew up in a single-parent family. His parents divorced in a very bitter and contentious divorce. His father became a very absent figure in his life. His mother moved into a neighborhood where, interestingly, they were not far from lyricist Oscar Hammerstein. Now, Oscar Hammerstein sort of took the young Stephen Sondheim under his wing, and according to Sondheim, taught him everything he knows about musical theater, kind of became interested in the boy as somebody who was a potential writer. He would give Sondheim little homework assignments of sorts to do. And he told him, all right, I want you to take a book that you like and try to write a play about it. And then the next time he would say, I want you to take a musical that you know about already and fix something that you think is wrong with it. Or in another case, he'd say, I want you to write a song about someone you know. And each time, Sondheim would come back to him with these little assignments, and Hammerstein would rip them to shreds. He would be not at all soft in his criticism and just show him the way that musical theater is put together. Steve Sondheim once said that if Oscar Hammerstein had been an airline pilot, then he too would be an airline pilot. That this was a person that he so looked up to that almost everything in his career was inspired by this man. Oscar and Rodgers and Hammerstein kind of got Sondheim some jobs as a teenager, doing things like working backstage for some of their productions, such as Allegro and Pipe Dream, and some shows that weren't giant R&H hits, but were still Broadway shows. That did give him some connections, and it did bring him closer to an awful lot of other people. And gradually, he developed an interest not only in writing music, but in writing words. And he really, more than anything else, wanted to write his own words to go with his own lyrics. He felt, to go with his own melodies. He felt that one composer could really get the point of view of a character across, as much as collaboration is a valuable thing. Not a lot of early producers, although they were introduced to this guy, and he was a young talent, and he had plenty of talent. It wasn't like the connections alone got in his career. But nobody really wanted to take a chance on him writing both lyrics and music for a show, and so he was often tapped to do just one, usually lyrics, for pieces like Gypsy, West Side Story, and a number of other shows in the 1950s. His initial success came somewhat on a show where he was finally granted the ability to do both music and lyrics in 1960. It's a show that has an incredibly long title called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. And it's probably Sondheim's most traditionally structured musical. Yes, it has some of the features and some of the style that we would see in later pieces, but at the same time, it's a much more straight-up comedy musical. It has been revived repeatedly and successfully on Broadway with a variety of characters in the lead role. Originally the part of Pseudolus, who is a slave in ancient Rome in the play, His role has also been played subsequently by Nathan Lane and even Whoopi Goldberg, with award-nominated success in both cases. Pseudolus is a slave, and he makes a deal with the young man of the family that owns him. That young man is in love with a girl named Philia across the way. Both Hero and Philia, the young man and young lady, are not the most intelligent people in the world, and Pseudolus decides that if he can get them together, that they should grant him in turn his freedom. They're in turn freed from arranged marriage and from doing what their parents say, and he's freed, of course, from servitude. The show features a number of really cleverly written pieces, including one that I think sums up a lot of the Sondheim style, which I will include as one of the links on this module, called Pretty Little Picture. That brings me to the Sondheim style, and I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the things to look for that make what Steve Sondheim does, and did and does, so unique from some of these other folks. First of all, when I'm talking about wordplay and about the use of unusual phrases and such, nobody is better at it than Stephen Sondheim. There's a great deal of complex internal rhyme. The rhymes don't just come at the end of lines, they come in the middle of lines. Sometimes they are a group of words, one-syllable words that are set to rhyme with one longer word, that sort of thing. The rhyming is really clever. There's a feature in Sondheim which I call inbuilt musical scansion. And I want to try to explain this as best I can. I guess in order to explain this, I have to explain the word scansion first. If any of you out there are English majors or have studied poetry, you may know something about scansion. Scansion is about how we derive meaning in a piece of poetry from the emphasis, from the way that the syllables are stressed or unstressed. And to do that, I'll explain to you a little bit, if you'll allow me to digress, I'll talk to you about Shakespeare for a moment. Shakespeare, as many of you probably know, his scansion is very much connected with the concept of iambic pentameter. Shakespeare loves the number 5. And there are always, well, not always, there are usually 5 stressed and 5 unstressed syllables in the line of Shakespeare. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Now, that happens a lot with Shakespeare, but here's where you can also get additional meaning from Shakespeare. Sometimes a character will go off of the beaten path, and that won't happen. They'll talk entirely in prose. Sometimes they'll leave off halfway through a sentence, and it won't count out the number 5. That's a space that maybe there's a pause in the dialogue. But wait, but you know, and it kind of goes like that. Or sometimes a character who is madly in love or terrified or crazy just loses that. That's a way that we get meaning from the way that the poem, in this case the piece of drama, is scanned, from the way that the beat of the rhythm of it is put in. Now with Sondheim, he's managed to do that an awful lot with what's in the sheet music. If there is a pause in a song, a rest per se, that's probably where there's a pause in the conversation. If a character is getting angrier and angrier, the way that the music is written is going to get faster and louder, and it's very hard not to act as an actor the way that Sondheim, the writer, wants the character to come off if you follow what's in the music. Because the music very often, so ingeniously, love it or hate it for this, really builds in what the character is feeling. Also, very simple characters in Sondheim often have very simple lyrics. They have a lot of one-syllable words, and they have a lot of really easy, melodies. Characters who are very angry or very hurt, all of that is, the emotion is really built into the melody. Now, the melody follows the lyrics. This is something, for example, that my friend in the department, Dr. Schnauber, probably takes issue with, and a lot of songwriters and composers do not believe this, or do not like this, but here's the way. A lot of times, a melody, let's say Rodgers and Hammerstein, Richard Rodgers probably comes up first with the melody, and he goes to Oscar Hammerstein, and he says, I have this idea. And then Oscar Hammerstein says, well, how about, oh, what a beautiful morning, that seems to fit that. Sondheim tends to figure out what the characters have to say in order to support the dramatic content of the play, and then writes a melody underneath that that mirrors the tones and the rhythms and the cadences of human speech. And as a result, the melodies, some people say, aren't all that pretty. Other people say, wow, they're the most singable and relatable songs around. It kind of depends on your point of view on that. There's a lot of alliteration in Sondheim, and again, if you're an English major, you probably know that that's the use of the same letter, of a bunch of words consecutively starting with the same letter. Usually, that gives the illusion in a Sondheim piece that the tempo is going faster, when in fact it's not. It's just a trick of the ear. It also makes characters look a little bit smarter and a lot cleverer, and it helps us know where the line is going almost before it gets there, which is a useful thing. An awful lot of Sondheim scripts, whether he contributes to the plot or often he prefers to work with someone else doing the lines, but nonetheless, many of his projects center on the concept of the anti-hero. We are generally brought up to root for characters that are sort of stylistically, you know, the people we're supposed to root for. Sondheim very often will say, well, what about the traditional bad guy's feelings? There are shows like Assassins which explore the inner thoughts of characters, of real-life people who've tried to kill the President of the United States. A show like Into the Woods tries to present a character like the Witch or even the Giant as someone who doesn't only have an evil agenda but has feelings. Sweeney Todd is a serial killer, essentially, but he's the hero of the story because we know what he's been through that drove him to that point. That anti-hero, that need to kind of look at things from the other side, is also a very frequent theme in a lot of Sondheim musicals. Sondheim is not afraid to use what we call a music dissonance. And for dissonance, I'm talking about, well, when keys on a keyboard are spaced apart correctly, they harmonize and they sound nice. When keys are directly next to each other on a keyboard, they tend to clash and sound bad. And a lot of people go, well, there's no use for that. Sondheim uses that frequently to portray arguments between two characters that are supposed to be very ugly, to portray danger, to suggest anger, things like that. A lot of these pieces use dissonance as part of the emotional content of the play. Finally, when I say there's unusual rhyme schemes and patterns, I guess I kind of come all the way back to this complex internal rhyme. Not only do the rhyme schemes as far as the words inside of a line have strange and unusual choices, but sometimes what line rhymes with what line? Rather than just A, B, or the traditional A, B, B, A, things like that. You might get A, B, C, B, B, A, C, and the lines rhyme, but they don't necessarily rhyme in exact connection with each other in the places that you would expect. An awful lot of people have problems with singing Sondheim. And you will hear, and I think it's probably kind of it's kind of inaccurate, but a lot of singers will say if something sounds bad, they think they can get away with it. And they'll be like, oh, well, it's Sondheim, nobody's gonna know, it's supposed to sound bad. It's not supposed to sound bad, it's supposed to sound like people talk. It is supposed to reflect how people communicate. Now, all of that said, the really fascinating thing is you get all of that often inside of a Sondheim song. Pretty Little Picture from Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, the piece you're going to get, one of them with this module, does the alliteration thing really well. It does the pausing for something where a character would normally pause, right in the song really well. It has a lot of these things going for it. But also, the way that the overall scores are put together, Sondheim seems to be the type who is very bright and who gets bored very, very easily. And as a result, he tends to tamper with the format of the traditional musical and how the play is just plain put together with new and unusual ways time after time. We're going to talk in the next section here. I'm going to break, we'll take a short break here. And when I come back, or when you come back and click on part 2 of this lecture, you'll get one of the most significant musicals in the American theater from 1970. We're going to talk a little bit about Company and why it was so unique and so important. And from there, I'll probably give you a much shorter exposure to some of the other important Sondheim musicals piece by piece. So join me for that, and we'll be there in just a minute.